I think all of the Democrats over the age of 70 should make this their last term. Tell me one who could not be replaced by someone else in their state and be like at least the same, if not higher value above replacement. And that's where Run for Something really thinks about our role, is to ensure that no matter where these maps end up landing, we have a deep, interesting, talented bench of local leaders who are vetted, who are experienced, who have built up infrastructure, who can jump in and run. Because we don't know what battleground is a dynamic term. It changes definition each cycle, and we should be really expansive and prepare for anything.
Over the past century, congressional elections have quietly become less and less competitive. In the late 1990s, about 4 in 10 districts were truly competitive. By 2024, that number dropped to 1 in 10. In most places, the winner is a foregone conclusion before the first ad even airs. As competition declined, incumbency hardened, and so did the political class. In 1981, the median age of a US senator was 52 years old. By 2022, that number was 65. Meanwhile, for comparison, the average American is 39 years old. That's a widening gap, not just in age, but in perspective and experience. In some states, the lack of competition is almost complete. In Massachusetts, in 2022, not one incumbent member of the US House faced a primary challenger. So while voters technically can vote for whomever they want, there isn't actually a choice. So how do we get representatives that are actually representative? Welcome to Everybody Gets Pie, the podcast about making the American pie of opportunity big enough so that everybody can get their slice. This is a podcast focused on the need for more American abundance in housing, in energy, in childcare, innovation, and more. I'm Justine, and as always, I'm joined by my co-hosts, Armand and Burhan. It is great to see both of you. Burhan, we have to start with you. You are currently in a race for city council in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So you have to give us an update. How are things going on the campaign trail?
Well, I'll say that ranked choice voting definitely solves the not competitive problem. We probably have the most competitive municipal elections in the state. And so it's, 20 candidates running for 9 seats. It's extremely competitive. But, the election, by the time this airs, will probably be tomorrow on November 4th. And so we'll see how it all goes down. But I'm cautiously optimistic and very, very tired.
And he will be even more tired when this airs.
You'll hopefully be able to sleep up soon after. It's funny because at the House level in Massachusetts, there wasn't much competition, but it sounds like at the local level, the ranked choice voting is doing its thing. So I am curious on that thread, what are some of the key ways that we could make elections more competitive and representative again? So ranked choice voting, I don't know, any other things?
I would say that, we talk about ranked choice voting, and that's the shorthand I use. So I think that the real secret is that in Cambridge, we actually have proportional representation, not just ranked choice. And so what that means is that, you get multiple representatives from different portions of the population in one place. So, in Massachusetts, it's all blue, but 35% of Massachusetts residents typically vote for Republican. And so if you, instead of 1 congressional district, you had 3 combined, then you would get 2 Democrats and 1 Republican if you set up the system correctly. And that's basically what exists in Cambridge, is that, we have 9 city councilors, but they all represent a different slice of the Cambridge population. So you actually get pretty diverse city councilors with different policy views. And I think that proportional representative of pooling together and electing multiple people really helps make things elective and get some minority opinions a seat in power.
Wait, so is it ward voting or at large?
It's all at large. It's in the 1940s, there was a lot of corruption. A lot of the same people kept getting elected again and again. So a bunch of Harvard and MIT professors came together and they came up with a mathematically optimal way to have an electoral system, which is both ranked choice voting and proportional representation, resulting in a jungle primary where you have 20 candidates and you have to rank them 1 through 20, and then the math takes over and selects 9.
Wow. But of course Cambridge would come up with that.
Burhan represents Cambridge.
Oh man, it's okay. So I guess, Armand, I'm even curious for you. The issue isn't necessarily age. I think it's funny. I don't know. I think if my dad were elected, I think he could do a pretty good job, and he's completely competent. And I would vote for my dad, and he's in his 70s. So it's not specifically an age issue. It's more of a representation issue.
Well, I think it's one of the things that like Burhan alluded to with these parties is that representation, particularly at a local level, is really difficult. And part of the reason that people get reelected when they're older and older, and it's hard for new people to jump in, is that it's very confusing, especially most cities in America are pretty much one-party cities, or there's nonpartisan even on the ballot. And so you don't have a very easy way to tell what candidate A versus candidate B stands for. In San Francisco, I get lots of mail, people all saying they're for housing. And I have to clue in and listen, okay, I know the EMB support this person, and I know like this group doesn't support this person. You have to read the tea leaf, but most people don't, and it's a lot to ask. When you have parties that are local, that is one way that you can sort of have easy labels for people to understand. As much as people hate parties, the founding fathers hated parties. The reason that they emerged is because people need a way to understand what voting for this person entails. That's easier than just trying to glean from any individual person. And so when that doesn't happen, you end up having weird heuristics like, well, I know their name a lot. There's actually a very funny story in Brazil where there's a guy who like legally changed his name to Barack Obama in order to win.
Oh my gosh.
Which I don't know why that gives you an edge in a Brazilian election. Like you're confusing somebody into thinking Barack Obama's running for city council in Brazil, but apparently helped him. I don't know if he won. But yeah, there's nothing wrong with somebody who's older running, especially if they're an effective leader, but they face inherent advantage once they were elected early and stay in part because it's so confusing in the local level that people sort of just stick with the name they know. And on the other side, if they're really frustrated with how things are going, they may not know the specifics of what that person has done. They just know, I've seen them forever, and it can get kicked out anti-incumbent wave. And either way, it's not fair because it's not based on what that person's actually done. It's based off of the heuristics people have to use because it's a mess.
I would also say that there's like a lot of risk involved, right? The reason that Massachusetts has such low turnover is it's a pretty blue state. But also, if you're a senator, who is probably likely to challenge you is maybe, let's say, a representative in like the House. But if they challenge you, that means that they have to give up their House seat because the primaries are at the same time. And so for that House member, it's actually a fairly big risk. Like even if you feel like you're a decent shot of winning, like, yeah, you could get promoted or you could just like completely lose this job and then someone will take that seat and then you'll have nothing, right? And that kind of goes down the list where if you're a member of the House, who's likely to challenge you is like maybe a state rep or state senator, but they also have an election at that same time. And so this is what, I think in general, like politics is like a very brutal sport, but it's also because like if you're going to challenge an incumbent, you better be sure you're going to win, or you're not only going to lose that election, but you're also going to lose your current seat, and you're going to have to figure out what other career paths to take in your life.
It's funny. I want to say that Cambridge might have found like a really great solution, but then also at the same time, I think it's very stressful to have to rank order 20 people. So that's Armand's point. But yeah, maybe for better or worse. But this brings up a very important point. Election season is here, and your local elected officials often have the biggest impact on your daily life. These races come down to just a handful of votes. So every vote truly counts. So check your local election information and make a plan to vote by November 4th. And with that, our guest today has been working to change the electeds pipeline from the ground up. Earlier, we spoke with Amanda Litman, the co-founder of Run for Something, which recruits and trains young progressives to run for local office. We first asked her why she started this movement. Let's take a listen. All right, Amanda, so you started your career in national campaign work before co-founding Run for Something. So what first got you interested in politics, and then what prompted the shift over to getting people to run for office?
I have the most boring answer to this, which I have never known a time when I didn't want to do politics. I knocked doors for Virginia Democrats when I was growing up. Back when Virginia Democrats didn't win anything. I saw Obama speak before he announced he was running his campaign for president in January 2007 at the university across the street from my high school, and knew I wanted to go work for him one day. I was like, that's it. That's what I want to do. So I went to Northwestern for college, specifically to get a job on his reelection campaign, because I just assumed he would win in 2008 and then he would run for reelection and it would be based in Chicago. Not a great reason to pick a college, but whatever. And my senior year, after bouncing around, I did like a summer on the Hill. I worked for the local county Democratic Party one year. I worked for some political magazines. I got an internship on the Obama campaign while I was still in school. I was doing online fundraising and volunteer recruitment. I was hired before I graduated and then stayed to work for the campaign through to Election Day. I then stayed in Chicago and worked for Organizing for Action for about a year, which was the president's nonprofit to do grassroots organizing around his agenda. Then moved to Florida to do the governor's race in 2014. Lost that. That sucked. And then I moved to New York to start working for Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign in 2015. I was her email director, so managing online fundraising and volunteer recruitment through the email list, really bringing people in. We lost, you may remember. Wasn't fun. And about a week after Election Day, I started hearing from people I'd gone to high school and college with. Hey, Amanda, I'm a public school teacher in Chicago. I'm thinking about running for office. You're the only person I know that works in politics. If I want to run for office, tell me what to do. Who do I call? And at the time, if you were young and newly excited about politics and when you wanted to do more than vote and more than volunteer, there was nowhere you could go that would help you. And that, to me, felt like a symptom of really big problems, both in our democracy, but also in the Democratic Party. So I reached out to a whole bunch of people with an idea. What if we started an organization to solve this problem? I need a project. I'm unemployed. And this seems like a good problem to solve. One of those folks became my co-founder, Ross Morales-Roquetto. And we wrote a plan and we built a website and then we launched Run for Something on Trump's first inauguration day, thinking it would be a small hobby. And 8.5, almost 9 years later, here we are.
I'm curious, you talked about like a lot of national politics stuff, but the people who reached out to you were, for example, like a school teacher wanted to run. And I'm curious why you started focusing on local elections when you first launched Run for Something.
We really wanted to think about what could be the entry point for folks. How could you get better people who would eventually run for governor and Congress and Senate and president? Well, by getting better city council members and school board members and state legislators. It also felt to me like an entry point that nobody was tackling. Like the fact that I couldn't tell my friend from college, yeah, call the state party. They'll definitely answer your call. Or, even at that time, for the women reaching out to me, Emily's List was just ramping up their state and local program. There wasn't like a guaranteed on-ramp. And that is the more that I looked around and based on my 6 or 8 years in campaigns at that point, felt like there was so much missing as part of our process because we didn't have good local leaders. And looking ahead to the first 4 years of Trump, these were the only places we were going to get meaningful progress. We weren't going to get it from Congress. We weren't going to get it from the White House. So if I wanted people who would protect reproductive health, who would build more housing, who would tackle the child care crisis, I needed to help elect state legislators and city council members. It was both practical and political.
If I could chime in here for a second, I just had to get this out early, which is I'm the biggest Amanda Litman fan. Actually, it's really funny talking to people who've had a pretty big impact on your life, but you never actually got to talk to. I think that it's funny now that there's a national abundance conversation. But my memory was kind of picking off where you left off, which is Trump gets elected in 2016. I'm a college sophomore. I'm I really want to get involved in politics. And then two things happened, which is one, my future Congresswoman, Ayanna Pressley, decides to run for Congress, and I get very excited and volunteer on her campaign. But then the second is I get super involved specifically around housing issues, and there's a whole bunch of us across the country who are kind of doing it at the same time. There's me, and this is where, you've never met people in real life, so you mess up their names. There was Rigel in Berkeley. Mm-hmm. There was Chelsea Byers in West Hollywood. Mm-hmm. And all of us became the youngest city councilor ever elected in our towns. And we're really focused on housing affordability issues in particular. But also what was super interesting in that moment was when I first ran, I had no one to ask for help, no idea what was going on. It was a lot of audacity and this random thing came up that was apply for Run for Something. And then all of a sudden you got connected with another local official and they were able to walk you through it. And even if it wasn't all of the step-by-step of how you do it, it was just nice to have someone to talk to. And that's the part that I at least remember the most. So both, this is my chance to say thank you for all that. But also, it makes me so curious because at this moment we talk about oh, we need to run different types of candidates, right? And maybe what Democrats aren't doing isn't working. I feel you probably have a lot of experience from that because local issues are so different everywhere, right? In Massachusetts, in Colorado, in Alaska. How do you think about local candidates and who to endorse or support, but also just so many different candidates who are doing hyper local, unique, specific stuff?
One that's so flattering. I'm so appreciative of the work that you and Rigel and Chelsea, we worked with all of y'all in those first races. It's been so cool to see the people who've been part of the Remember Something network now for years, like really rise to the national headlines. And it like makes me feel like I knew the band before they were cool, which is so fun. And I will say our program, go back in 2018, you ran 2018, 2019?
Yeah, 2018,
Yeah.
2019.
Our program now does a whole bunch of stuff to walk you through how to get on the ballot. Like we've really built it out. So everything from I don't know what office to run for all the way through to I just won, how do I govern, or how do I put city council candidate on my resume? We've got materials for all of that. So we've built it a lot since then. It's been very interesting to see the trends over the last 8 or 9 years. Some things have stayed the same. Candidates since 2017 have talked about housing. They've talked about childcare. They've talked about transportation. They've talked about healthcare, and I would say that includes reproductive health care, but also mental health care, also opioids. Man, do local candidates talk about opioids, especially in places as like West Virginia, but also Michigan, but also California. Like it comes up a lot. Gender affirming care is really part of that. They don't really talk about democracy. That's not because it's not an issue. It's just like not something that you speak abstractly about in local races. I think you all know this. Like it is a downstream effect of the work, not necessarily the explicit. The thing that I have loved about these campaigns, more so this year than any other year, is that we have more explicitly people saying, I'm not going to wait my turn. I'm done being told to get back of the line. I'm done being told, like, you're not the pick. I love that. I love people who get in when it's hard. And the thing that I would say that, like, really unites all of these folks who are running, this has been true now for almost the last decade, is they are totally ordinary people who do an extraordinary thing. Like, they're students, they're teachers, they're nurses, they're artists and parents and veterans and scientists and community organizers and activists and people who work at Chipotle and rodeo stars and social workers and sometimes all of the above, who look around and say, like, I need to solve a problem. And if they're not going to fight for me, I need to fight for me. So screw it. I'm putting my name on the ballot. Like, what a brave, audacious thing to do in the best possible way. I think it's so cool. So cool.
One thing I really appreciate is the way that Run for Something, and you just now talk about politics, is as that it can be a noble profession. I think the common, like, cynical, easy thing to say is just like politicians are corrupt, and it's like, politicians the worst, blah, blah, blah. And of course, there are a lot of them who are terrible. But the vast majority that I've met, even the ones that I disagree with, like, they're working locally, they get paid no money, they work super long hours. They do it because they really care. And I thought about it a lot, particularly because I visited my grandma in Poland recently, and she's getting closer to the end of her life. And she was one of the first city council women, like women elected to city council in her little village in Czechoslovakia, Poland, where communism fell and they first started having democracy. She basically single-handedly got like central heating for the first time, and because this was like a rural village, like water, plumbing, these really basic things aren't sexy, and like no one will remember that she did it. But she was so proud to walk around, just be like, I fought for like that street and that playground. And so I don't really have a question. I just wanted to say, like, I'm really grateful that, as weird as it is to say, that that you find like the nobility and the service and the honorable elements of like being a politician and running for office.
Well, I think that's part of one of my long-term goals, is to like really redefine what it means to be a leader. I mean, that's what I did with the book I wrote earlier this year, but also like for the candidates that we work with, they do it because they care. Like, you don't do it for the glamour, because it's not glamorous. It doesn't make any money. I'm not sure, Justine or Burhan, if your positions are paid. I doubt it. You're shaking your head a little bit.
It's paid, but a tiny bit.
It mostly sucks. You don't do it because it's fun. And I think that realization for a lot of people is like, it's so hard to run and to serve that you have to do it for a greater cause. And getting to work with local candidates for whom that is so clear, and who will say, and I quote Sarah McBride, now Congressman Sarah McBride, all the time. She once told me, if you want to fall in love with the place you live, run for office. Like, what a beautiful sentiment. Because it like puts you in touch with your neighbors in such a deep and intimate way. Like, you hear the things they care about. You learn about their problems. They come to you and they tell you about their problems. You can't avoid it. I think like it's so beautiful. And I want to bring that honor back, because I think it matters that we see the people who show up to lead as doing something really noble.
I had a question that I've been struggling with for a little while, a little bit different than what we were thinking about talking about, but just like came to mind, is like I kind of always struggle with like how people really love their local and state elected officials for the most part, right? Like whether it's their city councilor, short of like there being a scandal or some big thing, or like on the state side, like most people like their governors, they like their state senators, they like their state reps, they like their local city councilors. And then almost unanimously, like most people don't like Congress or the presidency. And like, they're all very unpopular, but it's like this dichotomy where like people are really happy at home, but just not happy nationally. And as someone who interacts with like both levels, like do you have a theory of the case of like why there's this huge division?
I do, and I have two explanations. One is that you can see your local elected more. Like you literally know them. You go to the gym with them. You go to the same grocery store. You're in the same carpool line. Your kids play on the same soccer team together. Like they are present in your life in a more direct way, and they feel like one of you. They ride the same buses. They drive the same cars. And even if you don't always like them, it's like only I can insult my sister. You can't insult my sister. You know what I mean? Like only I can be mad at my city council member. You can't be mad at my city council member, kind of thing. Very protective of your folks. I would be curious for what your perspective is here. I think right now in particular, it is very hard to make an affirmative case that literally Congress is not working right now. Like Congress can't deliver much. It's definitely not going to deliver anything good under the Trump administration. Whereas local leaders, like it or not, have to deliver things. The trash has to get picked up. The water has to run. The streets have to be paved. The schools have to function. Because the things that they do are so practical and like tactile, like you can literally feel them, there's like more of a direct sense of accountability. Like when the city council fails to do their job, you feel it. Whereas, I think a lot of people are feeling when Congress fails to do their job, but it feels more abstract for most people until it doesn't, and that really sucks. But I do think like the constant presence of local government in your life, like I think the most direct interaction many people have with government is like the library, the school, or the DMV. Those should run well and should function, and two of those are run by local governments.
It's funny, when I went door knocking with a state elected, and then I was the hyper local elected. And it's funny, people really wanted to talk to me. They had like, the stop sign at the end of the block, or the trash pickup, or whatever else it is. Those were things that people really connected with, or how my child gets to school every day. And so people would talk to me for 30 minutes, but they would be like, I'm done with the state rep. They can move on. And so I found myself getting tied up at doors for a lot longer because people were just interested in talking about this stuff. Now, I'd have to mention, I think 67,000 people, is this correct? 67,000 people have signed up for Run for Something in the past 10 months, which is more than at any point, I guess, since, it's the most in any 10-month period that you've had.
Not only that, we're actually up to over 70,000 people since Trump won last November. That's more than in the entirety of Trump's first term.
Wow. Why do you think that is?
I think it's a couple things. One, we saw a big surge right after he won. So they were like, I am going to run for office. And we were here, and, we weren't here the first 6 weeks after Trump won, which is part of the reason I'm so glad we exist now, because clearly there's a need for this. I think people have seen big moments over the last year that have shown them why this matters. The biggest organic candidate recruitment surges for us were right after the election, the first wave of Doge firings, when they started letting people go of the federal government, when folks realized, oh man, we got to get in here. When Chuck Schumer folded in the first shutdown fight back in the spring, big mad at the Democratic Party, same. And then when Zohran Mamdani won in New York, we had about 10,000 people sign up in the 2 weeks after he won. I think seeing a young person run for local office and beat the establishment, very inspiring.
So people are either angry or inspired, so then they sign up.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward.
I'm curious, are there narratives that you found that work really well across the country that Democrats should be using, or any sort of messaging strategy?
The thing that I think the most effective candidates do is they're able to answer the question, why should voters want me to win? Which is different than why do you want to win? You want to win because winning is great and losing sucks. Voters want you to win because you're going to do something for them and they're going to feel it in their day-to-day life. Or you're going to prevent something bad from happening. But you got to be about the self-interest of the voter, not about the self-interest of yourself as the politician. And our most effective candidates, the ones that can win long shot races where Democrats have never contested before, or flip districts, or even who can outperform the other folks on the ticket, are the ones for whom voters know what they're going to get. And that's I think often very That's why I think it's really hard for members of Congress, but often much easier for local electeds because you can clearly answer that question in a way that is specific. I will also say, and this will not surprise any of you, number one issue we're hearing Kansas talk about is housing. Always. That's been true a long time, but I would say it's especially true in the last 2 years. They're talking about housing. You know, the like flavor of the conversation changes a little bit based on where you are, what kind of office you're running for, and like what power you might have. But it is cost of housing, cost of rent, because especially for people in their 20s and 30s, but even for our, our boomers, this is not the housing market it used to be, and people are feeling that crunch. And like when you talk about cost of living, what you're really talking about is cost of housing.
Yeah. I mean, I remember I started with YIMBY like in 2015, and when I was in Burhan, I started on the East Coast, and both of us, there's a problem that was like very concentrated in blue, like really expensive cities, and a lot of what I heard like hearings is just, we'll move out of San Francisco, go to like a smaller, cheaper city. But over time, when we did EMBs for Harris in the summer, which was the origin of this, we had elected officials from all over the Midwest, all over the country, from places that you would never think of as having a housing crisis, but just it is really metastasized.
We're hearing in Montana, it's a big issue right now. We've got folks running for the Bozeman City Council. They're talking about affordable housing. In Iowa, as well as upstate New York, we're hearing folks talk about the mobile home crisis, the ways in which investors are buying up mobile home parks and then raising the costs of them really substantially. Obviously, in Texas, they're talking about all kinds of issues around housing and zoning. In Georgia, in Atlanta, we've got city council members talking about housing, as well as corporate investors buying up property there. In particular, like a huge number of the houses around Atlanta are not being able to be like purchased or rented by single families or by individuals. Each of these places, the flavor like takes a slightly different flavor, but in each of them, it's someone is messing around with the cost of housing and local government is not doing enough to fix it.
I do think it is a problem in certain areas of private, like large entities buying up corporate rentals. There is a really smart argument, though, about this guy named Kevin Erdman, who points out because financial regulation changed after 2008, basically the financing model for like starter homes collapsed out. Like those people can't get mortgages, and so the only people who are building like single family homes at that market level are the like large corporations who are doing it for rent. So there are definitely like huge challenges with it, but there's also, I think, when they're actually building the homes as opposed to buying them up, that's going to be a good thing.
Yeah, I absolutely believe that. I think it's like probably a downstream effect of other structural stuff that is my sense. Yeah.
What's really interesting to me is that, like, we talk about like the intra-party like civil war that's been going on, or like all these different ideas that are popping up in the Democratic Party, and it's always like on a left versus right spectrum. So to see like how progressive are you, and like what is electability looking like. And obviously, with run for something, like age becomes a big factor. I was wondering if you had any thoughts about like why is it that like housing and some other issues end up being, in my experience at least, pretty polarized around age, if you were being like a little like blunt about it. I think that there's like a Build America, YIMBY caucus, which ends up being more moderate House Democrats, but also like AOC has always like advocated for ending inclusionary zoning. And then on the other end, you have like a lot of older national Democrats who are like not as excited about zoning reform or housing or all this sorts of stuff. And I was just wondering, is like there like an age axis here that's kind of like covering for something else that you see in politics? Or like how are younger Democrats different than just like maybe being more left-leaning than like older Democrats?
In 1981, I believe the average U.S. home buyer was 31. Does that sound right? This year it's up to 56. There is a real change in the housing market, how you experience it if you are in your 20s or 30s versus your 50s or 60s. I mean, I think about this in my personal life. Like, I'm never going to buy a home. I'm shelling out thousands of dollars every month for childcare. That's a down payment going out the door every month in the form of my childcare payments. And when I explain to my grandma, like, how I go about finding a place to live, it is unimaginable to her. Like, what do you mean you go on the internet? What do you mean you look at these listings? What do you mean you have to show up with all of the paperwork ready to go because it's super competitive? What do you mean you have to spend thousands of dollars before you even move in terms of a security payment in first month? Like, it is unimaginable to her. That's not to say she's a bad person. Grammy rules. I love my grandmother. It is just, it's a marketplace and an experience that if you have not entered the housing market in the last 10 years or 20 years, and you certainly haven't entered it as a renter, in quite some time, you don't understand what it's like. So I do think it's telling, and this is one of the reasons Run for Something has been running our Run More Renters campaign over the last year, that for a lot of young people who make up a larger number of the renters, they are experiencing the housing market in a deeply personal way and are governing it accordingly. I mean, Bernard, you know this yourself, like having gone through it, like it changes the way that you engage with the policy. I think a lot about the fact that in the New York State legislature, there are more landlords serving than there are tenants. No wonder that like they're having a very distinct conversation around housing. And I'm always really careful because I get yelled at online about this all the time. That's not to say that like homeowners and older folks can't be really good advocates for building more housing, but their perspective on it is a little bit skewed because if rightly or wrongly, like the very simplistic way of thinking about it is if we'll build more housing, my housing value will go down. And that's my primary source of wealth. Even if that's not really true and like has no foundation in fact, that emotional sense that my wealth is tied up in this house and if we build more, my wealth goes down. Like I get it. It feels sticky personally.
I just wanted to have one quick follow-up on that. As we're thinking about what's like different about younger Democrats versus, some more establishment Democrats, so much of what you guys are doing is locally. And right now, like Democrats aren't doing great on the generic ballot and all this sorts of stuff. Have you seen examples of like local wins that like actually had ripple effects nationally, or like can be like litmus tests that we're thinking about of like, wow, like a local candidate here won on this message that says something about our national politics?
I think the trend that I have seen is that the best candidates are really reflective of their communities, which is like actually not something you can translate elsewhere, but it's sort of a philosophy in that the kind of candidate that can win the Miami-Dade school board race is going to be a little bit different than the kind of candidate who can win the Iowa City Council, which is going to be a little bit different than the kind of candidate who can win like the California State Senate race. And that's actually a good thing. The thing that they have in common is that they are so deeply connected to the place that they are running. And they love the place they are running, which feels really obvious to say, but you can hear like in the candidate's narrative when they are running on this place is a hellhole and we need to fix it versus I love this place and I want to make it better. The vibes of those campaigns are very different. And the ones who love it and want to make it better can draw people in. The ones who think it's a hellhole and we gotta like, how dare we let the people live like this? Like, that's not fun. There's no joy there. That's not a party I want to go to. I think that distinction more so than anything else is what I would encourage candidates to think about how they can incorporate into their framing.
Speaking of like the local to the national, I think we should talk about some of the national debates around, democratic messaging and stuff like that. And I think I've seen in your tweets that you've pushed back a little on the whole conversation around like, oh, should we do just left economic populism or should we try to moderate on social issues? And I think I've seen you argue that that's not really the issue. It's much more about individual candidates being able to speak to their communities. I'm curious if you could tell us a little more about your opinion on all of that.
Well, it's just like, that's not how people consume information. Most voters are not cohesive ideologues. They don't have like an ideology. They are busy people who mostly don't want to care about politics that much. And we should talk about the things that affect their day-to-day life. And for most of them, that is like a little bit more lefty economic stuff, if only because like the right's economic stuff doesn't serve them at all. And is maybe a little more moderate on social issues, but not all of them, not most of them. Maybe not the same definition of moderate that you or I have, or that the pundits online have. I think that's like the distinction, is that if the candidate doesn't genuinely believe what they're saying, voters can smell that. I find the discourse, the online debate about like, candidates should talk about these things. Like, cool, find someone who believes those and get them to run for office. Otherwise, shut up. Otherwise, you're telling people not to be themselves. You're telling people to like perform a version of them that they don't believe. And that more so than anything else is going to doom them to fail.
But just for the sake of argument, one thing I've seen pointed out is, Susan Collins isn't known for being a super authentic, like powerful communicator like Larry Hogan, Phil Scott. Like if you look at it from a Republican perspective, a lot of the Republicans who do win in like more blue areas are not people who have a particular authenticity or charisma. Just they too take issue positions that are to the left of the Republican Party. And Trump, very insincerely said that he would not do a federal abortion ban, and it was very transparent. But it did seem to have an effect of, kind of muted the opposite effect where more people were willing to give them benefit of doubt on the issue. So I'm curious how you think about that, where it's, there are candidates who on the right who seem to be making very inauthentic like policy stances, but they are helping them win.
Do you think they're inauthentic policy stances? Like, I think
I
Larry
don't
Hogan
think Donald
genuinely...
Trump is like any sincere
Oh, I think
beliefs himself.
Donald Trump gets away with stuff that no other Republican does. And Donald Trump gets
Yeah.
away with it because actually most people believe him. Like, we don't. But I think that's part of the reason why he's struggling now with approval, because once he takes office, he doesn't keep his promises. And people are like, I thought you were going to give me free IVF. Where the is my free IVF? I thought you were going to ban abortion. Like, what? Or I thought you weren't going to ban abortion. You know, I think that is his brand and his charisma, like it or not, supersedes any of his policy positions in many ways, or also allows people to hear what they want to hear. Whereas like a Larry Hogan, a Susan Collins, they genuinely believe what they're saying. I believe that Susan Collins is concerned. I also believe that she still votes however she wants to vote. But like, yeah, I'm sure it is concerning. And I think incumbents have a different way of needing to engage in the attention economy than challengers. I think everyone has slightly different kinds of voters. And I think that most of them would not, like, when's the last time Susan Collins ran in a competitive race was 2018. The media environment is very different now. And I am curious if how she will play in this particular moment. Like, I do think there wasn't TikTok in 2018. Short form video wasn't the same thing. People did not consume information in the same way. Our attention spans were a little bit longer pre-COVID. Is 2020? Yeah.
Yeah, probably 2020.
Yeah, 2020. In my head, it's 2024, but it's not. It's 2026 spiritually.
Yeah.
Like, it is a very different media environment. And that will affect, I think, how her ability to break through will work this time around, too.
Have you seen your guys' candidates at like the state and local level do a good job with TikTok and breaking through? Because I hear, I see national candidates on all the time, but I'm curious how that works for like a city council race.
Oh, yeah. They're so good at it, in part because they are native to the platforms. Not all of them are on every platform, but there's this great guy running for mayor of Jersey City, Musab Ali, who's so fun on social. I definitely would encourage you to take a look at him. Afton Ben, she's a Tennessee state rep who is now the nominee for the special election in Tennessee for I think Mark Green, the guy who resigned to go work for some government he won't tell us anything about. So it's a flippable district in the House. Long shot, but flippable. Super compelling on social. Francesca Hong, who's running for governor of Wisconsin, so fun on social. She's a former restaurant worker. Rua Roman in Georgia, so fun on social. She's state rep now, currently running for governor. Zach Walls from Iowa has like 150,000 followers on TikTok, and similarly a huge number on Instagram. I mean, James Tallarico is one of our alum down in Texas. It is really cool to see because they are so comfortable using these platforms because they've been on them since they were, like us. I don't know. I've had an email address since I was 6. I was on MySpace when I was 11. I had Facebook since high school. Like, it's not new. We're not new to this. We're true to this. And I think that has its downsides, but also it makes them very fluent in communicating in the platforms you need. I do subscribe to the theory that to a certain extent you need to be a consumer in order to be a producer, or at least understand the mechanisms of production. And like they're consumers and also producers.
I want to talk a little bit about some of the recent initiatives that you guys have been doing at Run for Something. So one of the initiatives is actually to get more renters running for office. So very few, it's shocking, very few renters actually hold elected positions. And I will say that I'm proud because in Arlington, Virginia, I think the first renter was elected a few years ago, Maureen Coffey. So I'm curious, like, why did you decide to focus on renters? And what do you think that changes when someone's not a homeowner is actually sitting in the decision-making position?
Maureen is a Run for Something alum, so I'm thrilled to hear that you are pals. 93% of elected officials are homeowners, as far as we know, compared to about 65% of the American people. Renters are wildly underrepresented in government. And as we talked about earlier, like, it changes the tenor of debate. I'm not saying it solves every problem. There's no single like silver bullet here, but it changes the tenor of debate when people in the room have different personal stakes in the game and have a different kind of personal experience with the housing market. And like Burhan is proof of that. We've also seen this in Austin. We've seen this in California. We've seen this in Minnesota. We've seen this in Virginia. Like, it changes how people are approaching the issues. I mean, even in Congress, Maxwell Frost, absolutely informed by his inability to find a home that he could afford to push forward legislation around renters. Chio Say here in New York City, but not my city council member, but like a few blocks over, It absolutely affected his or influenced his push to end the ability for renters to pay brokers' fees if they didn't hire the broker, because he was like, why am I paying a broker's fee when I'm trying to find an apartment if I didn't hire this person? You don't have to be a renter to fight for renters' issues, but especially as the housing market is changing and as the inability to buy a home feels more and more out of reach, it is directly affecting the quality of life for young people. And I will say, I think it's starting to become an issue for some of the boomers too, because as they sell their homes or want to move homes and want to move closer to their kids or their grandkids, like they also are going to want to rent. They may not want to buy a home or have it sign up for a 30-year mortgage. And it is changing their ability to engage in the housing market as well.
I was wondering how you think about younger candidates running, and you may not have an opinion on this, but like when it's not the same, like a younger, more progressive candidate running necessarily, right? Like I think, you might have heard from where I'm at in Massachusetts, Ed Markey is kind of getting up there in age and now has a primary challenger in Seth Moulton. And so I think that, often among younger people, you often are wanting, it's perhaps time for Ed Markey to retire, but also Seth is more in the moderate camp than I think Ed Markey is. And that's always an interesting question to have. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think the villain in this story is Ed Markey. Ed Markey should retire. Why is he running for re-election? I think all of the Democrats over the age of 70 should make this their last term. Tell me one who could not be replaced by someone else in their state and be like at least the same, if not higher value above replacement. Even people are like, well, Bernie Sanders. I'm like, yeah, I'm mad that Bernie Sanders ran for re-election. I think that was bad. And I think that does a disservice to the people of Vermont that he's not building a better bench of talent in Vermont. He's doing it now, but like where you've been the last 30 years. Elizabeth Warren, I love Elizabeth Warren. There's an incredible bench of talent in Massachusetts. What are we doing here? So, do I personally like Seth Moulton? No, but I appreciate people who get in when it's hard, when it's not popular. And my hope is that his willingness to go first opens the door to others to do it too. And I hope that becomes a competitive primary. And I hope Markey does the right thing and says, you know what? I'm going to preserve my legacy, not spend the next 6 months having people tell me why I'm too old to serve and having to defend that, and create space for new leaders. Because there is a great bench of talent in Massachusetts. There's like a really beautiful, broad, diverse group of people who could run for that seat, Ayanna Pressley being one of them. And I hope she's like, you know what, screw it, I'm getting into. But even if she doesn't, there's others too. And that is what the people of Massachusetts deserve.
I must say, it's funny because thinking about this, I was thinking about my own election to local office. The only reason, or what I believe, the big reason that I was able to get elected was because 2 incumbents decided not to run again. And so that opened a seat up. Mm-hmm. But I would not be here if it weren't for that.
Recently Politico covered your organization's new Battle Up strategy. It's a $50 million 5-year initiative to recruit, train, elect thousands of millennial and Gen Z candidates in targeted regions. I'm really curious about what's the thinking behind the plan, and especially the places that you chose, which are not the ones that I think people normally think of.
Yeah, so we have been doing this planning for most of the last year, thinking about what will the maps look like after 2032 and what does the Democratic Party need to be doing between now and then so that we have many, many paths to victory. We know, even before the GOP started doing their mid-decade redistricting process, that post-2030 census, based on the states that are losing population, in part because of housing affordability, places like New York, Illinois, California, would be losing both representation in the House, but also a vote in the Electoral College. And places like Utah, Idaho, Texas, and Florida would be gaining, in part because of their affordability, but also for any number of other reasons. And with that, the map for Democrats to win the Electoral College, but also to win the House, to win the Senate, would get even harder. Some experts say that if there were about 25 possible paths to victory for Democrats in 2024, if the maps went through as they were currently predicted, that number would winnow down to 5 in 2032, which I don't think our track record is good enough to leave that up to chance. So we wanted to make sure that as we thought about the lever that we could pull at Run for Something, we were being really intentional about building candidate recruitment and support work in states that gave us an opportunity. So that's not to say that these are the only states that we should think about as battlegrounds, or that these will definitely be battlegrounds. But if we don't do the work to recruit and support candidates now, they definitely won't be competitive 6 years from now. So we're thinking about places like Arizona, North Carolina, Georgia, and Ohio to make sure we're really lifting the bench and encouraging. We have great folks who can run at the top of the ticket. Like, it should not just be the Sherrod Brown as the only Democrat who could win statewide in Ohio. That's a problem. We're thinking about building a bench in Utah, Nebraska, and Iowa. Utah is going to gain another congressional seat in 2032. It would be nice if we had a great Democrat who could run for that congressional seat, who was really grounded in community, because that gain is in part coming from an increase in population in some of the urban areas where it's much younger and hopefully, I think, more unaffiliated. And then we're thinking about building battlegrounds in Texas, Florida, Idaho, Louisiana, and Mississippi. Some of those are because, again, of demographic changes. Some of those are because, Texas is only an R+6 state. There is potential there. I mean, battleground Texas is like the forever aspiration. But if we don't do this work now, it will never be on the table. So we tried to think, what is the work that will give us as much opportunities as we can 5 or 6 years down the road? We looked at how many folks are in our pipeline, how our population's changing. We talked to a bunch of experts, a bunch of partners across the ecosystem, and identified these are the places where we could be the biggest value add. I would also argue for investment in places like Alaska and Maine and elsewhere. Kansas probably should be on there, South Carolina maybe, but for what we can do in the work that we want to engage in, this is the dozen that we're excited about. And I think $50 million over 5 years is couch cushion money for some of these, for the fact that we're likely to spend $1 billion on a Senate race in North Carolina this year alone. So it's nothing. If someone listening wants to Venmo it to me, I'll take it.
I wanted to kind of follow up and say, it feels like Congress is going to change a lot over the next couple of years, in that, there's an attempt to overturn or weaken the Voting Rights Act. And what that might mean is that we might be looking for, you were just talking about Mississippi, we might have a Mississippi or an Alabama or a Texas that's 100% red, right? Like, no congressional districts that are for Democrats. And then there'll be a lot of pressure on Democrats to have an Illinois or a California that's 100% blue. Mm-hmm. And I just wonder what you think about that. It feels like both like a little bit of a dark period in democracy, where you don't have representatives from the other party in a lot of deep blue or deep red states. But also it kind of creates an issue of how do you even try to tackle that when gerrymandering is so powerful? I mean, it's not inevitable, but having a bunch of R+15 districts or D+15 districts is really hard to overcome.
I think it's bad. I don't think it's gonna be good. The hot take here, not gonna be good. But I also think that there is an opportunity for that to backfire. I mean, at a certain point, you can only dilute a community so much. If you have to take a D+20 district and spread it across 4 R+20 districts, they're each going to get a little bit bluer. Maybe not substantially, and they can be pretty surgical about it, but they a little bit bluer. And then it only takes Republicans to run one sex pest in one of these races for all of a sudden it to become a competitive race, if we have the candidates who can make it competitive. And that's where Run for Something really thinks about our role, is to ensure that no matter where these maps end up landing, we have a deep, interesting, talented bench of local leaders who are vetted, who are experienced, who have built up infrastructure, who can jump in and run. Because we don't know what battleground is a dynamic term. It changes definition each cycle, and we should be really expansive and prepare for anything.
In terms of getting some of these new voices in, what reforms do you think will make the biggest difference? Would it be, if you got to wave your magic wand, would you want to see ranked choice voting, term limits, public financing, or something else?
I'd say 2 things. Yes, it's not about voting, but I think we should pay elected officials more. Did both the elected officials nod your head? I think we should pay elected officials more and their staffs more. I think we should make running for office and serving a job that you don't have to be rich to do. Because I hear from a lot of candidates and elected officials that they would love to serve, but they can't afford to. They don't have the time, or they can't afford to. And I think that changes the kind of people who can run, because when you have money, your incentives are a little bit different. So I would pay elected officials more at every level, including Congress, even though they don't really deserve it. You can get a lot of money doing insider trading. So we should make it so you're not incentivized to do that, because your compensation is good. The second thing I would do is public financing. I think that the public financing, in particular in the New York City elections, where every dollar from a New York City resident is matched 8-1, and there are very clear spending caps and limits. There's ways around that. We've seen that with the super PAC spending $30 million, but it does level the playing field to a certain extent. And I will give the Campaign Finance Board credit here. They've been pretty rigorous about saying, you to Eric Adams, who had clear campaign finance violations, to Cuomo, who wasn't able to meet some of the matching fund rules. I think that has helped, and we know this for our city council candidates, has really helped level the playing field in a meaningful way. It is not a perfect solution, but it is a step in the right direction.
Well, before we go, we have 2 quick rapid fire questions for you. Number 1, what would you say to someone who's thinking about making the leap into leadership?
You should do it. You should do it. Stupider people than you, who don't care as much, who don't listen as much, who aren't going to work as hard, certainly have never second-guessed themselves. You should absolutely do it and run for something with love to help you. And it is not too late for 2026. Some of these filing deadlines are coming up soon. Like I think Texas starts in December, but it is not too late. Go to runforwhat.net, look up what you could run for, and get on the ballot. We will help you figure out the logistics. You just have to care and be willing to do the work. Everything else, we can help work you through.
Great. Okay, and now our final question. Is there a book, a blog post, a Twitter account, or something else that you enjoyed that you can recommend to our listeners?
I'm going to give you 2. You should follow Musab Ali, the guy running for Jersey City mayor. His social is so fun and so engaging, and is like a really good example of a different way of campaigning. And then I am obsessed with Amy Poehler's podcast. I think it's so fun. Like Amy Poehler should have had a late show for decades if that was a thing. I mean, that's basically what her podcast is now, but it is so soothing and so fun. And I just want to hang out with her, which is why Good Hang is such a good hang.
Good hang is a great hang.
I would also recommend by this young up-and-coming author this great book called When We're in Charge, The Next Generation's Guide to Leadership. I think Amanda Litman wrote it.
It's available wherever you get your books. I narrated the audiobook. If you also have a lot of generational rage, you might like it.
Well, I think the message I'm taking away from all of this is that it's not too late to run for 2026. So that's what we want to leave everybody with. Amanda, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you guys for having me. This was fun.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, thanks for listening. We would love to hear your feedback and who you think we should have on next by tagging us on Twitter at Pie4Everybody or leaving a comment on YouTube. And we will be back in 2 weeks. See you next time, Pie Gang.